The house I bought from my brother was supposed to be our sanctuary. It turned out to be a toxic time bomb. And the worst part? He knew. He watched my children breathe in the poison for 5 years, and he didn't say a word. He thought he buried the secret deep enough. He was wrong. I own an auto shop downtown. The roar of engines, the hiss of pneumatic tools, that's my normal soundtrack. I like fixing things. I like problems I can see. Metal and wires. Honest problems. This house was different. It was quiet. Too quiet. It was a sprawling, creaky Victorian. It had belonged to our Uncle George. A man whispered about at family gatherings. Brilliant, they said. Strange, they meant. When George died 10 years ago, my older brother, David, inherited the whole thing. I never questioned it. David always got the best of everything. He was the golden boy. I was just the mechanic. 5 years later, David came to me. He looked stressed. His expensive suit was rumpled. He kept adjusting his tie, a nervous tic he's had since we were kids. "Mark," he said, his voice tight, "I'm in a bind. Investments went south. Badly. I need to sell the house. Fast." He clapped me on the shoulder. The gesture felt heavy. Forced. It should stay in the family, he insisted. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Uncle George would have wanted that. And you, Sarah, and Ethan need the space. That apartment is too small. I felt that familiar pull. Duty. Family. David was my big brother. He needed help, so I did it. I took out a massive loan. I drained my savings from the shop. I bought the house. It was a strain. Money was tight, but it felt right. It felt like I was protecting our legacy. If you're listening to this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It was that sense of duty that blinded me. I didn't know the legacy was poisoned. We lived there for 5 years before I saved enough to tackle the kitchen. It hadn't been touched since the 70s. Avocado green countertops. Peeling linoleum. It was awful. The sound of the circular saw ripping into the old floorboards was music to my ears. Progress. Finally making this place truly ours. Frank, my carpenter, was working near the center of the room. Frank is a steady guy, ex-military. Quiet, meticulous. He was working right above the old root cellar access, a part of the basement we rarely used. It was dusty, damp, and smelled weird down there. We just kept the door shut. We ignored it. That was my mistake. I was pouring coffee, looking at the blueprints. The morning sun was hitting the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything felt normal. Everything felt right. Then the saw stopped. The silence was sudden, heavy, unnatural. "Frank? Everything okay?" I called out. No response. The silence stretched. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I walked into the kitchen. Dust sheets were draped everywhere. It looked like a ghost town shrouded in plastic. I found Frank standing near the exposed subfloor, staring down into the jagged hole he'd created. He wasn't moving, just staring. Frozen. "Frank? Did we hit a pipe? A wire?" I expected frustration. Cursing. I didn't expect what I saw when he turned around. He turned slowly. The man looked like he'd just stared into the abyss. His face, usually ruddy, was the color of drywall paste. White, shocked, his whole body was trembling. The hammer in his hand shook violently against his leg. I had never seen Frank scared. Not ever. "Frank, what is it?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Tight, fearful. He dropped the hammer. It clattered loudly on the wood. The sound echoed in the silent house. A gunshot in the quiet morning. He stumbled toward me, eyes wide, panicked. He grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. Desperate. "Mark," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, terrified. "What did you find?" I asked. My heart started hammering against my ribs. Was it termites? Black mold? A structural disaster? Please let it be a structural disaster. Frank leaned in closer. His breath was hot and shaky on my ear. The smell of sawdust was gone, replaced by something else. Something sharp, acrid. It stung my nostrils. A smell that screamed danger. "You need to pack your things and leave. Immediately." I pulled back, confused, alarmed. "Leave? Frank, this is my house. We're in the middle of a renovation. You need to pack your things and leave. Immediately." I pulled back, confused, alarmed. "Leave? Frank, this is my house. We're in the middle of a renovation. What are you talking about?" This had to be a joke, a very bad joke. "Listen to me," he hissed. He squeezed my arm tighter. His eyes darted around the room. like he expected someone to jump out of the shadows. "Don't ask questions. Get whatever you can carry. Get out of here." Then he said the words that froze my blood. "And don't tell your kids. Don't bring them back here, ever." My kids. Sarah and Ethan. They were at school. My protective instincts flared. "You're scaring me, Frank. Show me." He shook his head frantically. "You don't want to see it, Mark. Trust me. You want to remember this house the way it was. Show me," I demanded. I pulled my arm away. He pointed a shaking finger toward the hole in the floor. It was about 2 feet wide, opening into the darkness of the cellar below. I hesitated. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to run, but I had to know this was my house, my responsibility. I stepped forward. My boots crunched on the debris. I looked down into the basement. My stomach twisted into a cold, hard knot. The world seemed to tilt. It wasn't what I expected. I thought maybe he'd found a skeleton, a bag of old money, a hidden safe. It was none of those things. It was much, much worse. Beneath the floorboards, suspended by thick, rusted chains bolted into the support beams, was a massive metal container. It looked like a homemade coffin, or an industrial vat, maybe a pressurized tank. It was welded shut, complexly so. Gauges and valves protruded from the surface like metallic tumors. Wires snaked out of it, disappearing into the foundation walls. It looked ancient, dangerous, highly unstable, but that wasn't the worst part. There was something else. A dark, oily substance, thick as tar. It shimmered with an unnatural iridescence, like oil on water, but wrong, sickly green and black. It was seeping from the seams of the box, oozing out, dripping silently, relentlessly, onto the dirt floor of the cellar, forming a spreading pool of black sludge. The smell hit me full force then. It wasn't decay. It wasn't sewage. It was sharp, chemical, and deeply fundamentally wrong. It burned my throat. My eyes watered instantly. It tasted metallic, like sucking on an old battery. Horrified, I realized this wasn't just storage. This wasn't Uncle George's old junk. It was a containment unit, and it was failing. I didn't understand what I was looking at, but Frank's terror was contagious. The burning in my lungs convinced me. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my wallet and keys from the counter. "Go, Mark," Frank urged. He was already backing toward the door, coughing. We both ran. We burst out the back door, stumbling into the bright morning sunlight, gasping for clean air. We didn't stop running until we reached our vehicles. I jumped into my truck and peeled out of the driveway, tires spitting gravel. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from that house, away from the poison hidden beneath it. About a mile down the road, the adrenaline shock hit me. My vision blurred. The chemical smell seemed stuck in my throat, coating my tongue with that foul metallic taste. I pulled over sharply onto the shoulder of the road, flung the door open, and vomited violently into the ditch. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my phone. My house, my home, the place where my children slept, the place where we celebrated birthdays, Christmases. What was that thing, and who put it there? I had to call the police, the fire department, someone. That was the logical next step, but Frank's words echoed in my head. "Don't tell anyone." Why? If it was dangerous, shouldn't we call the authorities? But a chilling thought crept in. If I called them and it turned out to be illegal waste, I could lose the house, the equity I'd sunk everything into. Maybe even face charges. Even if I didn't know about it, I was trapped, cornered. I needed information first. I needed to talk to Frank, away from the house. I dialed his number. He picked up on the first ring. "Mark? Are you out? Are you safe?" His voice was still tight with fear. "I'm out. I'm pulled over on Route 12. Frank, what was that? What did we see?" "I don't know exactly," he said, his voice dropping low. "But I've been doing renovations for 30 years. I've seen hidden safes, illegal wiring, even a Prohibition-era distillery." He paused. I could hear him breathing hard. "I've never seen anything like that. It felt evil." He described what he saw in the moments before I looked. The pressure gauges welded onto the sides of the container, all reading deep in the red zone, dangerously high. The metal was bulging under the strain, warping. It wasn't just leaking, it was about to burst. And then he told me something that made the situation infinitely more complicated. "Mark, there were cameras." "Cameras?" My blood ran cold. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Yeah, small, old ones, hidden in the beams under the kitchen floor, pointed right at the box, and one pointed up, right where we were standing. "Are they active?" I whispered. "They looked ancient, dusty," Frank said, "but I saw a little red light blinking on one of them. Faint, but blinking. Someone was watching that thing. Someone knew we had found it. Who would be watching? It had to be connected to the history of the house. To the history I never bothered to check. Uncle George. George was a biochemist. Brilliant, but deeply eccentric. Estranged from most of the family, including my father. He'd worked for some big chemical corporation back in the 80s. Agricorp. Fired under mysterious circumstances. Something about unauthorized experiments. Ethical violations. He became a recluse, holing up in that house, tinkering in his notorious basement laboratory. He supposedly died in a lab accident right there in the basement 10 years ago. The area was sealed up by professionals, and David inherited the property, and David sold it to me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It knocked the wind out of me. David knew, he had to know. He sold me a house with a ticking time bomb in the basement, and he put my children right on top of it. I called David. My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. I was shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. "Mark? What's up?" "I'm about to head into a pretty important meeting," David answered. His voice smooth. Professional. He always sounded like he was closing a deal. "David, what's in the basement?" I demanded. No pleasantries. My voice was shaking. There was a pause, a beat too long. The silence crackled with tension. "The basement?" he finally said. "Dirt. Cobwebs. Probably some of Uncle George's old junk. Why, did you find a stash of antique wine?" He chuckled. It sounded hollow. Fake. Forced. "Don't lie to me, David. Don't you dare lie to me." My voice was low. Dangerous. "I'm renovating the kitchen." We opened up the floor. I saw it. David's tone changed instantly. Cold. Sharp. Stripped of all warmth. The brotherly facade vanished. "You what?" he snapped. "I saw the container. The chains. The leak. Cold. Sharp. Stripped of all warmth. The brotherly facade vanished. "You what?" he snapped. "I saw the container. The chains. The leak. I told you that kitchen was fine," he hissed. "I told you not to mess with the structural integrity of that house. Why are you tearing it up? Why can't you just leave things alone?" He wasn't worried about me. He didn't ask if I was safe, if I was exposed to whatever was leaking. He was worried about the secret. He was angry that I found it. "There's a metal container down there, David. It's leaking black sludge. It looks incredibly dangerous. Did you know about this? A metal box?" He scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're probably looking at the old septic tank connection, or the water heater." He was lying. I could hear it in the slight tremor in his voice, the way he was over-explaining. "It's suspended by chains. It has pressure gauges on it. They are in the red zone." I was shouting now. I didn't care who heard. "What is it, David?" "Listen, Mark," David hissed, his voice low, menacing. "Stop the renovation, right now. I can't just stop. It's dangerous. Seal up the floor," he ordered. "And forget whatever you think you saw. You're imagining things, you're stressed, you're overworked." He was gaslighting me, trying to make me doubt my own eyes, trying to bully me into submission, just like always. "Did you know?" I pressed, my voice cracking. "Know what? That Uncle George was a weirdo?" "Yes, everyone knew that. Now fix the floor, Mark. Don't cause trouble where there isn't any." He took a deep breath. "I have to go. Don't call me about this again. Fix it." He hung up. He knew. I was absolutely certain of it. He knew something was horribly wrong with this house, and he sold it to me anyway. His own brother, his own niece and nephew, he had trapped me in a potential disaster zone. I needed proof. I needed to understand the depth of his betrayal. I needed to know what we were dealing with. I drove to the local library, the only place I could think of to research the past, quietly. The metallic taste was still in my mouth. I spent hours digging through the digital newspaper archives, looking for information on Uncle George's career. His death. The stories painted a grim picture. He wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted from the scientific community. He had been experimenting with highly volatile synthesized compounds. The reports were vague, but mentioned accelerated degradation and extreme toxicity. There were accusations of illegal dumping contaminated water sources near his previous lab. Agricorp buried the scandal, paid the fines, and George disappeared into his house. But his work didn't disappear. It was waiting in the basement. And then I found it. An article about his death. It wasn't a simple lab accident. There was an explosion in the basement. But the fire department report noted that the damage was surprisingly contained because George had installed a customized containment system. They couldn't identify the chemicals involved. The heat had apparently destroyed the sample, so a private environmental firm was hired by the estate, by David, to clean it up. They sealed the basement, declared it safe. They lied, or David paid them to lie. David hadn't inherited a house. He inherited a toxic waste dump, and instead of dealing with it responsibly, he buried the secret deeper and sold the liability to me. He hadn't just sold me a flawed house. He had knowingly endangered my family for profit. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. It made me sick. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years, a memory that chilled me to the core. It illustrated exactly who my brother was, and I had ignored the signs. I was maybe 10, David 14. We visiting Uncle George for the first time. Our parents were trying to mend fences with him. We had brought our new puppy, Sparky, a little terrier mix, full of energy, full of noise. Sparky, oblivious to the tension in the house, slipped past Uncle George while he was showing off some harmless chemistry trick in the living room. The dog ran down the basement stairs. George flew into an absolute rage. I had never seen an adult so angry. His face turned purple. His eyes bulged. He slammed the basement door shut and bolted it, trapping Sparky down there. "He can't be down there," George yelled, spittle flying from his mouth. "It's not safe. The environment must remain sterile. He's contaminated everything." I started crying immediately, terrified by George's anger, worried about Sparky. I ran to the door, pulling at the handle, pounding on the wood. "Please, Uncle George. He's scared. Let him out." "Sparky." George ignored me. He looked at David, his expression cold, calculating. "Control your brother. He's compromising the situation." David, always eager to impress adults, always desperate for approval from the wealthy, eccentric uncle, the man who held the keys to the inheritance. He grabbed my arm and yanked me away from the door. His grip hurt. "Stop crying, Mark. It's just a stupid dog," David hissed at me, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. "But he's trapped. He's scared," I sobbed, trying to pull away. "Uncle George said it's not safe. Sparky shouldn't have gone down there. Now be quiet, or we'll get in trouble." "Do you want to make Uncle George angry? He used the fear against me. He always did." We waited for over an hour. I sat by the door, listening. I heard Sparky whining at first, scratching at the door, desperate to get out. Then the sounds became weaker, more desperate, pained yelps, and then silence. A heavy, final silence. Later that evening, Uncle George came upstairs, alone. He was calm again. Composed. The dog must have found a way out through the old ventilation shaft. "He's gone." I knew he was lying. I knew Sparky was still down there. I knew something terrible had happened. But David didn't care. He didn't even look sad. "See? He ran away." "I told you to forget about it," David said coldly, turning back to the television program Uncle George had put on. "You're always so dramatic."
He hadn't shown an ounce of sympathy.
Not for the innocent puppy, trapped and likely dying in that terrifying basement. And not for his heartbroken little brother. All he cared about was maintaining the peace, securing his position with Uncle George. David's complete lack of remorse, his cold dismissal of my pain, and the dog's suffering. It was chilling. He simply didn't care about anything that didn't benefit him. And now, years later, he had done the same thing to me and my children. We were just like Sparky, expendable. Collateral damage in his pursuit of wealth. My phone rang, pulling me out of the dark memory. It was Frank. "Mark, I need to see you," he said, his voice urgent. I took a sample. We met at my auto shop. It was closed for the day. The garage bay's silent, empty. The smell of gasoline and oil felt clean, familiar compared to the chemical stench of the basement. Frank pulled out a small glass jar, sealed with electrical tape. Inside was a smear of the black, iridescent sludge he had scraped off his boot. I have a buddy who works at a university testing lab, Frank explained. He looked nervous, kept checking the door. Dr. Osthorne. Smart guy. I asked him to run a quick analysis. Off the books. He handed me a printout. His hand was still shaking. Mark, this stuff is bad. Really bad. What is it? I asked, dreading the answer. Thorne couldn't identify the exact compound. It seems homemade. Synthesized, highly complex. But he said it's a highly potent neurotoxin. A neurotoxin. Poison. Slow acting. Frank continued, reading from the report. It aerosolizes when it hits the air. It gets into the ventilation system. We were breathing it. Exposure over time causes nerve damage, cognitive decline, respiratory failure, eventually, death. If this story is keeping you hooked, drop a like, because the realization hit me harder than anything else. It wasn't just a potential explosion. It wasn't just an environmental hazard. It was poison, and it was already in the air. I thought about Sarah's asthma. It had gotten significantly worse since we moved into the house. The doctors couldn't explain it. They kept changing her medication. I thought about Ethan's constant headaches, his difficulty focusing in school, his sudden mood swings. We had been living above a leaking vat of poison for 5 years. David had let his brother's children be slowly poisoned, all for the sake of a quick sale. Preserving the property value, the rage I felt was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Cold, sharp, focused. I wasn't just angry. I was ready to burn everything down. How do I protect my kids now? They were at school, blissfully unaware. I couldn't let them go back to that house. Not even for a minute. Not even to grab their favorite toys. But I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. It would terrify them. I called my neighbor Susan Miller, a kind older woman who adored the kids. She lived a few blocks away, outside the immediate danger zone. Susan, it's Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We've had a situation with the renovation. Oh dear, what happened? You sound awful, she asked, her voice full of concern. A major plumbing issue, sewage backup. It's a mess. The house isn't habitable right now. I hated lying, but I had no choice. Can the kids stay with you for a few days, until it's resolved? Of course, Mark. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll pick them up from school. We'll have a grand time. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it more than you know. My kids were safe. For now I had to deal with David. I had the lab report. I had the motive. I had the rage. But I needed more. I needed undeniable proof of the cover-up. The report proved the toxin, but it didn't prove David knew. I remembered the name of the environmental firm from the library research. Secure Enviro Solutions. I looked them up online. They went out of business shortly after they handled Uncle George's estate. Convenient, too convenient. I needed to find someone who worked there. Someone who knew the truth. I dug deeper. I found a few names listed in old business directories. Most were dead ends. But then I found one. Thomas O'Malley, listed as a site supervisor for Secure Enviro. He now lived in a small town, about 50 miles away. I drove there, my mind racing. I had to get this right. It was a small, rundown apartment complex. I knocked on the door of Unit 2B. A man answered. He looked older than his years. Tired, haunted. He was smoking a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. He looked like a man carrying a heavy secret. Thomas O'Malley? I asked. Who's asking? His voice was guarded, suspicious. My name is Mark. I live in the house that belonged to George Blackwood, the one your company cleaned up 10 years ago. O'Malley flinched. He looked away. He took a long drag from his cigarette. I don't know what you're talking about. That was a long time ago. Yes, you do, I said, keeping my voice low. The basement. The containment unit. It's failing. His eyes widened slightly. Fear. Recognition. It's leaking neurotoxins, I continued. My children are sick. They are being poisoned because your company lied on the report. O'Malley's face crumpled. He looked genuinely horrified. Failing? They told us it would hold for 50 years. The welds were military grade. Who told you? My brother David. He hesitated. He looked around nervously. The brother. Yes. David. He finally admitted it. He paid you to lie, I stated. It wasn't a question. He paid us extra, O'Malley whispered, shamefaced. A lot extra, to seal the basement and sign off on the paperwork. They said the chemicals were inert, harmless, just old fertilizer experiments. You knew they weren't, I said, my voice hardening. We suspected, O'Malley admitted. The readings we got, they were off the charts. But the money was good. We needed the work, and the brother. He was persuasive. Persuasive? What does that mean? He threatened us, O'Malley said. Said if we reported it, we'd be tied up in lawsuits for years. Said AgriCorp would come after us, that we'd never work in the state again. We just did what we were told. David hadn't just lied. He had actively concealed a deadly threat. I need you to testify to that, I said. I can't, he whispered, looking terrified. I signed an NDA. If I talk, I'll lose everything. My pension, everything. And I'm scared of what AgriCorp might do. You lied about a toxic waste dump. You endangered lives. You endangered my children. I know, he choked out. Tears welled in his eyes, and I regret it every day. It eats me alive. But I can't go public. They will destroy me. He was scared. David and the corporation had scared him into silence, just like they tried to do with me. I need proof, Thomas. I need something tangible. Something I can take the authorities. O'Malley hesitated. He wrestled with his conscience. He looked at a picture of his own grandchildren on the dusty side table. He made a decision. He went to a closet and pulled out a dusty old file box. I kept copies, he admitted, his voice trembling. I knew this day would come. I knew that thing wouldn't hold. He opened the box. The initial assessment reports. Before the brother intervened. It details everything we found. The compounds, the instability of the container, and the memos from David instructing us to falsify the final report. He handed me the file. It was thick, detailed, damning. This is it, I said, my hands trembling as I flipped through the pages. The proof, the smoking gun. This proves David knew. This proves everything. Take it, O'Malley said, and protect those kids. I'm sorry, Mark. I truly am. I had the proof. Now I had to confront the monster. I drove to David's office. A sleek, modern building downtown, all glass and steel, a monument to his success. Built on lies and poison, David's success was built on selling properties, hiding their flaws behind glossy brochures and smooth talk. I realized now that I was just another transaction to him, a liability he needed to offload. I barged past the receptionist. Sir, you can't go in there. Mr. David is in a meeting, she called after me. I ignored her. I kicked open the door to his corner office. He was on the phone, laughing loudly, looking out at the city view. The king in his castle. He stopped when he saw me, his face tightening, the smile vanishing. I'll have to call you back, Richard, he said smoothly. He hung up. Mark, you look terrible. You really need to get some sleep. What do you want? I thought I told you not to call me. The arrogance, the dismissal. It fueled my anger. It's over, David. My voice was calm, deadly calm. What are you talking about? He adjusted his tie again. The nervous tick. I know what it is. The neurotoxin. I threw the lab report onto his expensive glass desk. David's facade cracked. His face turned pale, his eyes darting to the report. He quickly regained his composure. He picked up the report, glanced at it, and tossed it back. Dismissively. Keep your voice down, he hissed. I don't know what this nonsense is. A neurotoxin? You're sounding hysterical, Mark. Just like always. I also know about the cover-up. I pulled the secure Enviro file from my bag and slammed it onto his desk. The thick file landed with a heavy thud. David stared at it. His eyes widened in shock. He recognized the logo.
Where did you get that?
His voice was barely a whisper. Thomas O'Malley sends his regards, I said coldly. David stumbled back, sinking into his leather chair. His face was ashen. He knew he was caught. You went digging, he muttered. You couldn't just leave it alone? You knew the basement was contaminated. You knew it was dangerous, and you sold the house to me anyway. I didn't know the specifics, David insisted, trying to salvage the situation. He wiped his sweaty palms on his expensive trousers. I knew George had chemicals down there, yes, but I thought they were contained. The basement was sealed. Stop lying, I shouted. I have the memos, David, the ones where you instructed them to falsify the report. You knew exactly what was down there. He started pacing, agitated, cornered. I needed the money, Mark. I was drowning in debt back then. The banks were closing in. I had no choice. You had a choice, David. You chose money over my family. And my voice was shaking with rage. Sarah's asthma, Ethan's headaches. That's because of you. They are being poisoned. It's probably just allergies or mold, he dismissed, waving a hand desperately. The house is old. Look, the leak is small. We can fix it. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes pleading. I know a guy. He can seal that container up tight. Quietly, no need to involve the authorities. No need to blow everything up. We can still save this. There is no we. I shook my head. You defrauded me. You endangered my family. You might have killed my children. David leaned over his desk, his expression hardening, the mask of the successful businessman returning. But this time, it was laced with malice. The real David emerged. Listen to me, you ungrateful little mechanic, he hissed. The insult stung, but it also clarified everything. The contempt he always felt for me. If you report this, the authorities will come in. Hazmat teams, the EPA, they will condemn the house. They will seize the property. We will lose everything, he continued, his voice rising. Our inheritance, the equity you think you have, gone. You understand, you will be bankrupt, homeless, and possibly facing charges yourself. They will blame you for the improper storage. He was threatening me, trying to scare me into silence, using my own ruin against me. I don't care about the money, I shouted, slamming my fist on his desk. The glass rattled. Well, I do, he shouted back, his face red with rage. That house is all we have left of our family legacy. I am not going to let you destroy it because you're scared of a little spill. A little spill. That's how he saw the slow poisoning of my children. A little spill. You will keep your mouth shut, and we will fix the leak, or I will ruin you, he threatened. The family legacy versus the safety of my children. It was no contest. David had already destroyed the family legacy when he prioritized money over blood, greed over morality. It's over, David. I'm going to the police. I have the proof. I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him standing there, surrounded by his trophies and his greed. But I knew David. He wouldn't just give up. He was desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. I needed to secure the evidence at the house, the container itself, before David tried to hide it again. I couldn't go back to the house, unprotected. Not with the chemicals. I went back to my auto shop. I grabbed my heavy-duty respirator, the kind we use for painting cars. I put on thick coveralls and chemical-resistant gloves. I looked like I was preparing for chemical warfare. In a way, I was. It was dusk when I pulled up to the house. The street was quiet. The house looked dark and imposing against the twilight sky. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a tomb. I took a deep breath, the respirator filtering the air, the taste of rubber replacing the metallic tang of the neurotoxin. The silence was eerie. The only sound was my own breathing inside the mask. I walked into the kitchen. The hole in the floor gaped like an open wound. But something was different. There were tools on the floor that didn't belong to Frank. A heavy-duty caulking gun, empty tubes of sealant. A powerful flashlight beam was cutting through the darkness of the cellar. Someone was down there. I knew exactly who it was. I crept closer to the edge of the hole and looked down. It was David. He was wearing a cheap paper mask and gardening gloves, woefully inadequate protection against the toxins. He was desperately, frantically trying to patch the leaking seam on the metal container. He was gauzy, panicked. The sealant wasn't holding. The black sludge was oozing around his makeshift patch, thicker now. The pressure was building. He was trying to cover it up. Again, trying to erase the truth. "David," I called out. My voice was muffled by the respirator. But the anger in it was clear. He jumped, startled, looked up. His eyes were wide with fear and desperation. The flashlight beam cut the sweat glistening on his forehead. His paper mask was already stained with the black sludge. "Mark, you came back. Good. You scared me half to death." He tried to sound casual. His voice was trembling. "Help me with this. It's almost sealed." "What are you doing?" I demanded. "I'm fixing it," he shouted, his voice strained. "Like I said, it's just a small leak. We can contain this. We can save the house. We can save everything." I pulled out my phone and hit record. The camera lens pointed down into the cellar. I needed this. I needed his confession on tape. "Save the house? David, this thing is poisoning the air. It's a time bomb. The gauges are in the red. It's gonna burst. Don't be dramatic," he snapped. He pressed harder on the sealant tube, the muscles in his arm straining. "It's fine. Uncle George knew what he was doing. This container has held for decades. It just needs a little maintenance. It's failing, David, and you knew it was dangerous when you sold it to me. I have the reports from Secure Enviro. I know you paid them to lie." David froze. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. "Reports? You're bluffing." But his voice wavered. "I needed the money," he confessed, his voice cracking, the desperation finally breaking through his facade. "I had as you couldn't even imagine. The bank was going to foreclose on everything I owned. I had no choice. I did what I had to do to survive. Got him. You could have told me the truth. We could have dealt with it together. We were brothers. Dealt with it? How?" He laughed bitterly. "The cleanup would have cost millions. No one would have bought the house. It was worthless. I made it valuable." He looked up at me, his face twisted with resentment. A shocking sense of entitlement. "I gave you a good deal, Mark. I helped you get out of that cramped apartment. I kept the house and the family. You should be thanking me." The delusion was staggering. The arrogance was breathtaking. "Thanking you? For poisoning my children? For slowly killing us? They're fine," he screamed. The desperation was turning into pure rage. "You always were so weak, Mark. So emotional. So self-righteous." Then he twisted the knife. The memory he knew would hurt me the most. "Just like with that stupid dog, Sparky." That hit me like a punch to the gut. The casual cruelty of the reminder. "You remember Sparky?" My voice was hollow. "Of course I remember. You cried for a week over a worthless mutt. You need to grow up. This is the real world. This is business." He paused, sneering up at me, his eyes filled with contempt. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Sometimes there's collateral damage. My children, my family. Collateral damage." The words echoed in the silent cellar. The rage I felt solidified into something cold and hard. We turned back to the container, dismissing me again. I had enough. I stopped the recording. "It's over, David." "I'm calling the authorities." David froze. He looked up slowly. He saw the phone in my hand. The realization of what I had just done hit him. "You recorded me?" His voice was low, deadly. "I did." His face turned purple with rage. He dropped the caulking gun. He scrambled up the cellar ladder. Slipping in his haste, fueled by adrenaline and fury, he lunged at me as he cleared the opening, grabbing for the phone, his eyes wild. "Give me that," he shrieked. He slammed into me, knocking me back against the kitchen counter. The breath rushed out of me. He was heavier than me, stronger, driven by a desperate need to protect his lies. We struggled, grappling in the dusty, half-demolished kitchen, the respirator digging into my face. He clawed at my hand, trying to pry the phone loose. "I should have let you rot in that cheap apartment," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth, his breath hot and foul. "I gave you this house. Everything you have is because of me. It's mine. He was consumed by his greed. He truly believed he was the victim, that I was the one betraying him. I thought about Sarah struggling to breathe, Ethan crying from the headaches. I thought about Sparky. A surge of protective rage flooded through me, the rage of a father whose children were threatened. I shoved him off with all my strength. He stumbled backward, tripping over the pile of floorboards and Frank's discarded hammer. He crashed down hard near the edge of the hole. The floor groaned under the impact. He lay there, panting, the fight gone out of him. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with hatred, but also with the realization that he had lost, utterly and completely. I dialed 911, my fingers trembling. "The house is yours, David," I said, my voice cold and dead. The connection between us severed completely. "You can die with it." The flashing lights arrived quickly. First the police, then the fire department. When I mentioned neurotoxins, a failing containment unit, and potential explosion, the situation escalated rapidly. Within an hour, the entire street was cordoned off. Hazmat teams in bright yellow suits swarmed the house, looking like aliens invading my home. It looked like a scene from a disaster movie. I stood across the street, wrapped in a shock blanket, watching the nightmare unfold. A sharp-looking woman in a windbreaker approached me. "Agent Jenkins, EPA Criminal Investigation Division. You're the homeowner?" "Yes." "Mark, we need your statement, and any evidence you have." I handed her the secure Enviro file from O'Malley and my phone with the recording. Her expression hardened as she listened to David's confession. They brought David out in handcuffs. He looked small, defeated, his expensive suit covered in dust and the black sludge. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was arrested for reckless endangerment, criminal negligence, massive fraud, and a host of environmental crimes. Frank arrived shortly after, having seen the news reports. He stood beside me, silent for a long time. "You did the right thing, Mark," he said quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I know, but it cost me everything." The investigation took months. The contents of the metal container were highly toxic, an unstable concoction of Uncle George's failed experiments. Agent Jenkins said we were lucky it hadn't ruptured completely. A full breach would have contaminated the entire neighborhood, potentially killing hundreds. The house was condemned. The ground beneath it was declared a toxic Superfund site. It would take years and millions of dollars to clean up. The property was worthless. Worse than worthless, AgriCorp was also investigated. They claimed ignorance, but the lawsuits were already piling up. David took a plea deal and went to prison for a very long time. The news was plastered all over the local papers. The family secret was out. The scandal destroying our name. But I didn't care about the name anymore. 6 months later, life was very different. We were living in a small, rented apartment across town. It was cramped, noisy. The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people. I had to sell my auto shop to cover the staggering legal fees and the massive debt from the mortgage on a house that no longer existed. I was starting over from scratch, working as a mechanic in someone else's garage. It was hard, humbling, but it was honest work. One evening, I was sitting on the small balcony, the sounds of the city traffic below me. Sarah and Ethan were inside, doing their homework at the kitchen table. Sarah's asthma had almost disappeared. Ethan's headaches were gone. His grades were improving. They were safe. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wasn't crying for the house, or the money, or the shop. I wasn't crying for the betrayal, or the loss of the life I had built. I was crying with relief, the overwhelming, exhausting relief that my children were safe. I had lost the illusion of my past, the weight of a toxic legacy, but I had gained something far more valuable. I walked back inside and looked at my children, their faces focused on their work, peaceful, untroubled. Frank had managed to save a small piece of the old oak floorboard from the kitchen before the house was demolished. One of the few things that wasn't contaminated. I had sanded it down, the wood smooth and warm under my fingers, and carved their names into it. I hung it above the doorway of our small apartment. This was my true inheritance. Not property, not land, not a poisoned legacy, but the safety and the future of the people I loved. We had nothing material, but we had everything that mattered. We were home. Thanks for listening. Please rate our story in the comments. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means a lot because your time matters.